Welcome everybody to Intro to ActiveRecord. Let me just make sure my screen is all ready to share. Okay, cool. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I have my little README here with the objectives. Today we are going to review what an ORM is. We're going to discuss ActiveRecord's purpose and this concept called convention over configuration. We're going to set up our database and our models with ActiveRecord, and I'm going to try my best to do this from scratch. This is a little more complicated, but again, I still want to kind of reinforce the concept of simplicity, or like really being aware of what are the bare bones things we need to get our applications up and running. Can everyone make sure that they're muted? Or Jen, I think you have the power to mute people. Awesome, thank you. We're going to explore what a rig file is and the possibilities therein. Rig files are going to be super helpful. And then we move into our ORMs here. There are going to be lots of rig tasks that are going to be useful, and not, it's good to know how we build rig tasks, but they'll be made for us most of the time. We're going to talk about migrations and what a schema, what schemas are, and how they relate to our database and why this pattern is useful. And then we'll discuss altering databases and models with further migrations and stuff called rollbacks. And then tomorrow, when we talk about relationships with ActiveRecord, we'll kind of dive into a little bit more. You can see how, tomorrow will be more about relating tables and how foreign keys work, etc. Are there any questions before we get started? Okay, so to review, an ORM, right, stands for an object relational mapper. And I'm actually going to head over really quickly to the ActiveRecord documentation. So ActiveRecord is kind of maintained, or you'll find the most available resources on the Ruby on Rails website. So if you're ever looking for resources about ActiveRecord and you find yourself on Ruby on Rails and you're thinking to yourself, this is too advanced, the answer is no, it's not. The ActiveRecord that we're starting to use now is going to be the same ActiveRecord that we're going to continue to use through Ruby on Rails. As you'll see later on, we'll download some of the rig files just specifically for Sinatra. But the idea here is that whenever you're making queries or you need to learn about migrations or anything ActiveRecord related, it's okay to go to this resource. So last week we built ORMs from scratch. That was the purpose of the previous two study groups. We created classes, and then with those classes we allowed them to have class methods that would create the tables for us, right? That would save instances to the database, recall instances from the database, and then we can even create aggregator methods, right? Like find all of the tweets in the database that belong to this user. Or we could even ask, like, which tweet is the longest, right? We could have really kind of gotten to these things, and you have all learned the SQL queries necessary to make those commands. So what's interesting, or what am I trying to say? We wanted to teach you, again, maybe have gone over this with you on your one-on-ones, but in the program, we're always going to teach you what's happening under the hood. We're always going to teach you the long, drawn-out way to do something, and then introduce you to the way that someone, an application or a library or a gem that somebody has built out to do a lot of that heavy lifting for us. So enter ActiveRecord. ActiveRecord is an ORM, right? And I love the definition here, a technique that connects the rich objects of an application to tables and relational database management systems, right? Our Ruby objects are those rich objects, and we are connecting them to the relational database management system. Using ORM, the properties and relationships of the objects in an application can be easily stored and retrieved from a database without writing SQL statements directly and with less overall database access code, right? So our ORM is supposed to be the middle person between our Ruby application, Ruby objects, and the tables and rows and columns in a database. ActiveRecord is a library that comes bundled with all of the SQL queries, all of many of the actions that that we had you build out on your own, like save, or even, you know, things find or create by. We'll go over a more complete list of the methods that ActiveRecord is going to provide for us. But I just wanted to do a quick review of object relational mapping, and then this kind of is the introduction to what ActiveRecord is. ActiveRecord is going to become our ORM. We're no longer building our ORM from scratch. Any questions so far about this? Okay. So again, I guess I kind of touched on ActiveRecord's purpose a little bit. We're going to talk about this concept of convention over configuration. As we learn more about libraries and frameworks, we are going to have more and more what's called abstraction, right? We're going to see less and less of what's happening behind the scenes in our code, and we're going to be relying on libraries or gems or other people's code to do that for us. And as we begin to work with more powerful tools, the rules that we have to use in order for those tools to work is going to become a little bit more clear, a little bit more rigid. There's going to be less flexibility in what we can do or what we have to do in order for our projects to work. So this is the concept of convention over figuration. And I really just think that the intro here on Wikipedia is a good intro. So convention over configuration, also known as coding by convention, is a software design paradigm used by software frameworks that attempts to decrease the number of decisions that a developer using the framework is required to make without necessarily losing flexibility. So again, this is the philosophy that you can see here that was applied to the Ruby on Rails framework. Is related to earlier ideas like using the concept of sensible defaults and the principles of least astonishment in the user interface design. Okay, a lot of that maybe doesn't make sense, but the takeaway here is that as we move on to use these frameworks, the concept is you're the coder, you've got bigger fish to fry, right? You're worrying about you know, your relational architecture, your background, your database, how your models are relating to each other. You're worrying about meeting MVP in a, you know, by a deadline. You're worried about filtering and cleaning, making sure that your user data is coming through correctly, that no bad data is being stored in the database. You're worried about, yeah, again, getting the product to market. You have all of these deadlines. So we need to take these arduous tasks like building SQL, etc., and make them really fast. And in order to make them really fast, the best way to kind of do that is just to apply a pattern, to have you memorize that pattern, and to just allow you to develop trust in the pattern, saying if I follow these principles, if I follow these given rules, a lot of the code can just be written for me and I don't have to spend my time thinking about it. So we're going to explore we're going to introduce you to this concept a little bit. Convention over figuration. That just means follow the pattern and expect that things are going to start working for you. The thing that, you know, we call this a little bit Ruby magic, right? As you enter into Sinatra and further into Rails, you're going to start seeing a lot more of this abstraction. You're going to start seeing a lot of things happening without complete, you know, without the reason being really explicit. And I think this is the thing that students feel most frustrated about when entering ActiveRecord, Sinatra, and Rails, is that this convention over configuration can go really far. There can be so much that's happening that isn't 100% clear to the coder. And so it's important to, as we're learning these things, take the extra time to investigate, you know, what are these things doing for me? How is this library intercepting or making my life easier by writing code for me? And how can I take advantage of that without losing sight of what's happening behind the scenes, right? So just make sure that as you're building things with Sinatra, with ActiveRecord, with Rails, that when you don't understand why something is behaving a certain way, that you're taking a second to say, what is happening behind the scenes? I understand that this is making my life easier, but how? Okay, convention over configuration, the pros and cons of abstraction. Any questions about this so far? Again, I would encourage you to look into this concept, convention over configuration, understand it as a philosophy, and then, of course, just take a look at the Ruby on Rails guides to ActiveRecord. And here it says ActiveRecord is the M in the MVC model. We'll get to that the week we come back from the break week, I believe. Okay. So again, as I think is useful, I'm just going to try to build an application from scratch, implementing ActiveRecord as our new ORM. So again, the first thing that we're going to need, or that I like to start with, is the gem file. And of course, the source for pointing to Ruby gems is optional. The default is Ruby gems already. We like rpry. We like SQLite 3. And what else do we need? I think we're going to need a rake file, or we're going to need a rake. And we're going to need ActiveRecord. And then we're going to need another gem called ActiveRecord, Sinatra ActiveRecord. So as you can see, we're taking close steps, taking steps towards utilizing the entire Sinatra library, building applications with Sinatra. Okay, today I think I'm going to make our model today will just be movies. So I'll just make a movie.rb file. Let's see. And then I'm going to try to start organizing this a little bit more. So all of our models are going to go inside of our app file. Okay, and then I need to make a config folder. And inside of my config folder, I'm going to make my environment file. And inside of my environment file, I'm going to require relative everything from app. So I'll just say, well, my movie.rb file. And then I'll also let's see. If I just want to require all of my gems, I believe I can say require bundler / setup. I believe it's like this. And I can say bundler.require. If anyone has doubts about this, let me know. I'm not 100% sure about this. But I'm basically just saying all of the gems that I have, you know, I want them here. And then the other thing, of course, that we need to set up is our database. Now, with the ActiveRecord gem, we can actually just kind of create, we'll use what's called a YAML file. And the gem is going to look in the config folder for a database.yaml file, and inside of the YAML file is where we're going to create the configurations for our database. If you don't understand this 100% right now, it's totally fine. The YAML file is going to be important for the future to know a little bit about, but generally they're not super complex, luckily, at least in this stage. YAML is just a type of markup language. You can write HTML files with YAML. It's losing popularity, but there are definitely some cases in which it's still used. In this case, for example, configuring our database. So we just are going to have one database for the purposes of our application here. It's going to be called development. So generally, there are 3 phases of building an application, right? There's the development phase. It's when we're building it. You know, we're just building it from scratch. There's the testing phase, right, where we are applying and running tests on it to make sure that it doesn't break. And then there's the 3rd phase where it's actually in production. It's live, people are using it, right? for the purposes of this program, we're almost entirely going to be working in the development phase. None of our applications are ever going to be truly production, right? And we are not really requiring you to run tests or test your application at any point. So generally, databases have a development database, a test database, and then a live database. In the development database, of course, we can fill it with information that we want to use as tests. And then in the test database, it's like, okay, we're just trying things out here. And then the development database would, of course, be all of the database, the information of the users who are active. So we're going to specify a few things here. We're going to say the adapter is SQLite 3. Shoot, hold on a second. I have to look up something else really quickly. Yeah, that's what it is. There are these like two weird bits of it that I don't 100% or don't have memorized. And again, that's okay. If you don't have them memorized, it's fine. So we're going to specify the location of the database. We're going to say that the database is located in our DB folder at development SQLite 3. Notice we haven't created that yet. I'm not 100%, which I'm forgetting off the top of my head what pool and timeout mean. But I can post some resources about that later. But this is basically, 5 lines of code, our database YAML file, and it's just going to tell ActiveRecord, this is how our database is going to be set up. Again, very simple. In the environment file here, let me just run bundler really quick to make sure that everything installs correctly. Okay. I'm going to take ActiveRecord, which is now our ORM, and I'm going to access the module base, and I'm going to call this class method on it called establish connection. You may have seen this in previous labs when we were just writing SQL. This is kind of what it was trying to replicate. So when I say establish connection, I'm going to say the adapter is SQLite 3, meaning this is the type of database that we're using. And then I believe we also have to point to the database where it actually is. Again, I'm forgetting off the top of my head what these things are. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I was right. I'm just going to share this for now. Can everyone see? Wait, it doesn't look right. No, it's okay. I'll just do this. DB. Just oops. And database. That's okay. So now we only have 2 more things left to do. I'm going to create my class movie. And here's really the exciting part about ActiveRecord. I usually would create my attribute accessors, right? Title, release year, and director. And, I would define some class methods and some instance methods, or etc. Generally, unless I want to do something very custom, ActiveRecord is going to take care of all of this for us. All we have to do is inherit from the ActiveRecord base. It's really incredible. This is literally all that our movie class file is going to look like for the moment. Notice that the ActiveRecord base that's being referenced here is the same ActiveRecord base that where we originally established a connection. So you can begin to see that it's important that these things are connected, right? An active record truly is the ORM that's being the middle person between the two. As I had stated previously, you can find ActiveRecord, the code base, on GitHub if you're curious about, what this looks like, what's happening behind the scenes. I really encourage you to take a dive and look into that stuff. All right, and then the very last thing that we need is a rake file. If you haven't gotten to this, oops, I want the rake file to be in the root directory right next to my gem file. If you haven't gotten to this part in the curriculum yet, the rake file is simply a file that has a specific syntax for declaring helpful commands in the command line that execute code for us. You can customize your rake files to do a lot of things. And ActiveRecord takes advantage of the power of the rake file to provide us some really helpful, to execute some code that's really essential to managing our databases for us. So in my rake file, I'm just going to require my environment file. And I'm also going to require, I think it's Sinatra ActiveRecord rake. And what this is doing is it's bringing in all of my rake commands that ActiveRecord has given me. Okay, and then I think there's one more thing that I want to do. Sorry that I keep peeking over at my other file. I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Yeah, ActiveRecord/rake. Okay, cool. And then I want to add one last custom task. So task console do. This just is to start a price session. I'm not quite sure why the Sinatra rake file doesn't come with a console. I think it should be pretty essential, but if I remember correctly, you have to add your own. Okay, so just to recap what we did, I created a gem file. I have my pry, I've got SQLite 3, I've got rake, I've got ActiveRecord, and then I've got my Sinatra ActiveRecord, which is where I'm going to get a lot of my rake file actions from. I set up my database YAML file that just gives really brief configurations to the database. Again, I've forgotten exactly what these do. The essential things to kind of remember here are to say that we're using SQLite 3 to manage our database, and this is where the database file is ultimately going to be. Notice that I haven't created it yet, that's okay. I have my environment file, which requires everything that I've installed in Bundler. We have just one movie, we have one model so far. We have one class, it's in my movie.rb file, just requiring that there. And then I'm connecting the established connection to the database via ActiveRecord. And then in the application, in the movie file, I'm inheriting from ActiveRecord base to establish the connection between the movie class and between the information that will soon be in my database that we're about to get to. And then I have my rake file, and my rake file is going to be responsible for handling a lot of the code that we're going to execute in order to get our database set up. I know that's a mouthful, but are there any questions about any of this so far? Getting your application up and running this far is called like bootstrapping, right? We're tying everything together. You're, for your project, not going to have to build all of this from scratch. We'll provide you with some options for having this all bootstrapped for you. But I just, again, want you to see what the bare essential pieces are to getting this up and running, so that when we do give you the command line, or that gem that sets up your Sinatra application for you, and you're looking at the files, you can say, okay, I know what these essential things are. As we get further into the program and we rely more on gems to bootstrap our applications for us, we're going to see more and more files that we're unfamiliar with. And again, I think it's just really important to train you to think, okay, what are the essentials I'm looking for in my app folder, my config folder, my gem file, my rake file, things like this. That's kind of the whole purpose of this. Okay. Should be good for now. So I guess we can take a second to, let's see if I can find Sinatra rake file, ActiveRecord. We're gonna go over a couple of the essential rake file commands. Generally, in your command line, you can do rake-t, and it gives you a list of all of the possible tasks that the rake file knows how, or has been given information about, how to, what commands to execute. So based on the tasks that the Sinatra ActiveRecord gem has given us, we can type in these commands. So whenever we want to call a command from the rake file, we always type rake first. These commands have been namespaced to identify that they all pertain to doing something with our databases, whether it's creating migrations, dropping, etc. You'll use a good chunk of these. Let's see. So let's just try running this first one here. Let me go back to this. Rake db create. Oop. Why doesn't console the one you made show up in the list? Ah, that's a good point. Let's see if it works. Yeah, it does work. That's a great question. I think that rake-t is also something that we get from Sinatra ActiveRecord, and so I think it's kind of just watching out for its own rake tasks. Yeah. Let's see. That's a good question. I wonder what happens if I just type rake. It's going to say like you're going to need to do some stuff. Okay, there is no default. All right, I'll look into this. In a bit. But notice that I typed rake db create, and then my response was it created a database db/development SQLite3. So this file that wasn't here before, this db file, has appeared, and inside of it we have a file where our database is going to be, right? Again, I said that it wasn't necessary for us to create the database file because there was a command in the rake tasks that set it up for us. So this kind of tells me that we've successfully bootstrapped our application and everything so far is connecting with each other, talking with each other in the right way. So again, we're kind of at a point where we don't have anything in our database. And in fact, if I were to open up the console and if I have a, let's say make a new instance of a movie, I can't even create, even though I've defined the movie class here and I've required it in my config folder, I can't create a new instance of a movie because now that ActiveRecord is handling a lot of this logic for us, it's only going to respond to classes that actually have tables associated with them, right? I just tried to create a new instance of a movie, and it says we couldn't find a table movies, so I'm not really going to permit you to create a new instance of one. So let's go ahead and create. Let's configure our database so that. Oh shoot! What did I do? Database development database. Am I in the right one? Was there always two here? What happened? Database development. What did I do? Oh, That's what it was. It's supposed to be development. Okay, so, what happened? Yeah, I named them differently. Okay, so what, let's see. Okay, interesting. I'm just gonna change them both to be development because I think that it's what it's supposed to be, not database. And then I'm pretty sure that the changes are supposed to happen in here. But that was my fault because I put development in one, and then in my database YAML, I put, this one had originally said database and this one said development. Okay, let's continue and see which one ActiveRecord decides to put the information in. Okay, so I want to set up my database, right? I want to create a table that's going to handle my my movies table. So the way we do this is through a concept called migrations. And then here, again, I would encourage you to read up about migrations. So from the Ruby documentation, migrations are a convenient way to alter your database schema over time in a consistent and easy way. You can think of each migration as being a new version of your database. A schema starts off with nothing in it, and each migration modifies it to add or remove tables, columns, or entries. So essentially what a migration is, well, ActiveRecord is utilizing a kind of pattern to create a user coder-friendly way to keep track of changes in our database. And this is why I had said earlier that once you start using ActiveRecord, it's not 100% necessary or common to use a database schema visualizer, because the schema is going to be a file in our database folder that is going to demonstrate the current state of our database for you. You'll also notice that as you're building an application, you will want to make changes to a database, right? You will halfway through your project say, I should really have added this column to this model, or maybe I didn't need this column, or don't need this table. And it's important for the application to have a way to kind of track the changes that you've made. So like the documentation said, the purpose of a migration is to really kind of create a vehicle or create a pattern in which we can follow that lends itself to keeping track of the changes in our database for us. There's also kind of a concept that you'll encounter moving forward, where as we work again with more powerful libraries that do a lot of the heavy lifting for us, they again kind of present a pattern or a convention that they expect us to follow in order to make sure that everything internally is working correctly, and that we kind of have less of our fingers in the mess so that there's less kind of room for error, right? The ActiveRecord is saying, hey, we're about to give you this pattern that we've created called migration. If you follow it, the way that we've designed it to be followed, you shouldn't really have anything to worry about, right? So there's less room for us to make an error by providing us with this migration pattern that we're gonna use. So let's make one. Are there any questions before we make our first migration? Okay. So as you may have seen in the lessons, we can create our migrations by hand. We can enumerate them 001, our first migration, 002, our second migration, right? But with the rake file that we've received from our Sinatra and ActiveRecord gem, we can create migrations automatically that are time-stamped so that the order in which they've created is already noted, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and use a rake command, rakedb, and the command that I'm gonna be used is called create migration. And then there's a parameter of name that I'm gonna use. I don't necessarily need version, but I'll just go ahead and use name. So I'll say create migration, and then all caps name equals, and then we're gonna use camel case here, or sorry, snake case. I'm gonna say create movies. remember again, and this is part of convention over configuration, that the table name should always be plural, whereas the model name should always be singular, right? So if I press enter here and keep an eye on this database file, we'll see that a migrate folder has been created. And inside of it, a migration has also been created with the timestamp. Today's the 17th of December, and here are probably a bunch of seconds, right? And it's been labeled createmovies.rb. We've already been created the class create movies for us, and the link to the ActiveRecord migration with the right version number has also been created. And then we have our def change method in here, where we will write specific code that is going to go ahead and alter the database for us. Are there any questions about this so far?
Yeah, I had one question when I was working on these, because I don't really understand where the migration connects to the database. Like, how is it connected to the database you created? And if you have like multiple databases, how does it know like which one to put the table in?
Well, can you repeat your first question? How is it connected to the database?
Yeah, like where do you connect it? Because I saw in the labs that there's a file where you connect the classes, the models to the database, so they know which database to look into. But how does ActiveRecord say, hey, this migration, you should create this table inside this database, you know?
Well, every application is only going to have one database.
But like, how does it even know that how does it even know where it is, and like, where are you telling it, like, here is the database, connect to this database and put the table in here?
Well, in my ActiveRecord, in my environment file, I'm establishing the connection to the database here with ActiveRecord, right? I'm saying this is the database where I want the information to be stored, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm still a little confused because it seems like base knows how to do that. Like base knows where the connection is, and then within movies you're inheriting from base, but within the migration you're inheriting from migration. You're not inheriting from base. So I still don't quite understand.
Yes, but you'll see that migration is more about the functionality that's available within what we can do with the migration, and less about what the connection still exists, because we're still using our ActiveRecord gem. Like, these are just different components within the ActiveRecord gem, right?
Yeah. So somewhere inside ActiveRecord, you told it where the database is, so it just knows that whenever you create a migration, it just goes in whatever database it's connected to.
Well, the migration, right, the different modules can speak to each other, right? We don't know how this is written behind the scenes. This is why I said like it might be useful for us to go dive into like so I don't know, ActiveRecord. So let's see if I can find like a quick, if we can take a quick look at this, see if we can find an answer. So inside of ActiveRecord, we have migration, right? We also have, where was base? Nope. ActiveRecord. Let me see. Here's ActiveRecord base, right? So let's go to ActiveRecord migration. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, we might be getting into like a big mess if we get in here. But I would encourage you to try to look in here to see how they talk to each other.
Okay, cool. I'll check it out.
Class migration. Da, 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 da. Yeah. But what I see how we're within the migration class, right? But we can still call on base if we need it, right?
Yeah, I think I
So
see. Yeah.
what's
Okay.
eventually going to happen is that we're going to create the migration here, and based on the specific arguments that we give it, it's going to again make some connections for us. So you're right, and this is going to be something that is, you're going to feel stronger and stronger moving forward. The connections of what these libraries are doing for us is going to become more abstract. It's the connections aren't going to be as apparent, so it is going to be up to you to dive into those code bases and try to understand on a deeper level what's happening, if you have time to do that, right? Like, what we're showing you here are just the steps that you should be able to follow in order to create an application. And I don't think that Jen or myself or anyone in the code review is 100% going to say, is going to quiz you on the specifics of how an active record migration knows, how to connect them, how to relate to the movie model, and then how to determine the rows in the database. Like, on a super low level, that's not what's expected of you. But as you become familiar with making migrations and noticing the changes and the nuances in how we decide to create tables and then how they relate to the models that we've created, I'm sure you can start to intuit a little bit of how they relate. And I can maybe dive into that a little bit more in a second.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much answered my question. I just didn't realize the migration module could talk to the
Yeah.
base class. But
Mm-hmm.
now that I see that that can happen, I get how it could get the connection from the base class. So, um,
Right.
yeah, thanks. I can check this out more on my own time if I want to.
Cool. Sweet. And then wait, what was your second question? I'm forgetting what your second. Do you remember what your second question?
Oh, yeah, it was just like if there's multiple databases, how does it know which one to connect to?
Oh yeah, but for the purposes of most of your applications, there's only ever going to be one database.
Okay.
And so this one I have here was two accidentally, but I'm going to delete one in just a second because I named the files incorrectly.
Okay, so basically just like you shouldn't have two databases because it could create problems, so just like make one database.
Yeah, 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 just always have one.
Cool, sounds good.
Mhm. And then somebody asked, why is it better to use the timestamps than creating them manually? I like creating them manually because I think I noticed that students are more tempted to kind of, when it comes to databases and migrations, I think students feel more tempted to kind of hack the order in which things are running to kind of create a certain behavior. And I really believe in following the convention of like following the steps that the people who created the library have created for us to follow, so that you know I don't make any errors. And you'll see that there's a limit to like what we should tamper with as far as like how migrations work. Again, if you are consistently naming things in order and you're not going in and deleting files and renaming things, which is I think is that's what I was trying to say. Like it's tempting for students to like go like 001 create movies, and then like 002 create actors, and then 003 creates directors, and then say like, oh no, I don't want actors, I'm just gonna do that, and then I'm gonna change this back to 2. Like, that's I think sometimes a temptation for people who are just beginning. And I I think like if you just follow the timestamp, it, you know, and let that kind of be the source of truth for in what order you ran things, it will prevent you from making mistakes that could affect your database. Again, there's nothing wrong with putting them in order. The other kind of benefits to using the rake file is that it already defines the class for you in the change and the Ruby version. So there's just like less typing that you have to do. If the tool is there, I would encourage you to use it. Any other questions? Yes, yeah. Jen noted in the comments that it can be a good record when changes to your database happen. That is really the kind of ultimate purpose here. Like the timestamp really gives you like the day and the month that you decided to make a change. And not saying that you could go back and look at when a file was created too, but it's more explicit. And then we'll see why the timestamp is important when relating to the schema. Okay, we've only got 10 minutes and we've got to make a table here. So you can look up the steps for how to make a migration, of course, on the ActiveRecord documentation. So the basic procedure for creating a table is to follow this this pattern here. And for those of you who have maybe spoken with us about several times, it's important to remember. So we're gonna write create table here, and it's important to remember that create table is a macro, right? Macros are functions that execute other code for us or make code for us. This actually might not be, is this, could this be considered a macro? Because we're giving it a block. This could be debatable. But we're provided with a function called create table that's accepting an argument of what the table name should be, right? In this case, the table name is going to be called movies. And then we introduce a block. And of course, T is just kind of, we could call this whatever we want, right? But the convention or just the pattern that we see most times in the documentation is just that it should be T. And this T is just kind of like a little, you can imagine it as a hash or something like that, that has all of these potential data types on it, right? And then we select our data type, and then we provide what we want the name of the column to be. So we want movies to have titles, and the data type of those titles is a string, right? And we also want movies to have release years, and the release year should be an integer, right? So we follow this simple pattern to kind of build out our table. And then when we're ready, let's see, do we want anything else? I guess we can say like a description, or maybe we'll say a rating, a little bit easier. Then we can run a rake command that says, okay, we're ready to take this change that we've determined we want to make to our database, and I want to actually apply it. So we run rake db migrate. Create, and it says, okay, we've created a table called movies, and we've given it the specific columns. Now let's see which one it decided to go in. I knew it was going to go in this one. Okay, so I'm going to delete this file. Okay, and then notice we now have a new file in here called schema. Okay, if we look at the schema, it says that the version of the schema matches the timestamp of the most recent migration that has been run. This means that in the future, whenever we run rake db migrate, the schema is going to compare its version to the timestamps of the migrations, and it will never rerun migrations that happened before this timestamp, because it's expecting that those migrations, the changes made in the migrations, are already reflected in the schema. This is why it's very important to not just go in and delete files in the migration in hopes that the schema will change to reflect the deletions that you've made. I don't think we'll have time today, but tomorrow for sure we'll definitely go a little bit deeper into how to go back and make changes into migration without simply accessing the files and deleting the lines of code that we don't want anymore. You'll see that if I were to take out the ratings and try to run my migrate file again, the ratings are still there because as a precaution, ActiveRecord is checking the version of the schema and is not rerunning any migrations that have happened before that time. So that is why going in and just deleting a line of code from your migration isn't enough to just change your database, right? And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. So your schema file, again, is just a visual representation of your database. And I guess the same thing goes here as well. If, for example, you don't like that your movies table has an integer column, or sorry, a rating column with an ID of integer, you can't just go in and erase it and expect that this is going to affect your tables on the database level. The schema is just a representation for you, right, of what is of what the current status of your database, what the current composition of your database is. So going in and erasing something like that directly is only going to cause you trouble. And again, we'll go in tomorrow about how to actually make changes in the database. Are there any questions so far? We've written our first migration. We ran db migrate. We can see the changes reflected inside of our database file, even though we can't read it in the text editor. And our schema is now reflecting the changes that we've made in our database. I know from reading the schema that I have a table called movies, that it has a title, a rating, and a release here as the columns. Okay, so let's see how far we got in. Talk about rate file, purpose of migration, define the schema, and I think this is the last bit that we'll get to tomorrow, like I said. But I just wanted to go back and open up the console again, and then try to make a new movie. Remember when we had first tried to run movie.new, it says that there was no database called movie, and I don't know if the yeah, could not find a table called movies. Sorry, table, not database, table. If I try to run movie.new now, Ruby makes me a new movie instance, and look, it already knows all of the attributes that a movie needs, right? Or that we've determined that a movie should have based on our schema, right? Based on the columns in the database. So I can say movie.new, and the title is the Titanic, and the rating is a 5, and the release year, oh, what was it? 1990? Oh, I don't know. Oops. What did it do? Oh, 97? Really? Ah, and this is supposed to be. No, I don't think I need to do that. What's happening? Assign attribute. Does it need to be hash? Wait, what's going on? Oh, that's because I put titles. Wham, wham. Oh, shoot. Okay, so we'll talk about how to fix that tomorrow because I put plural titles when it should just be title. So I'm going to save this result to a variable, and notice that it doesn't have an ID because it's not in our database yet. Say Titanic.save. The result says true, and now if I say movie.all, I have my Titanic movie with now an ID of 1. And notice how all is a class variable, sorry, a class method that's already been defined for me, along with, say, this is the magic of ActiveRecord. I can say find by, and then I can give it one of the columns, one of the attributes that I know a movie has. So find by rating, and then I pass in 5, will return that movie to me. find by release year, 1997, will also return Titanic to me. I didn't create these methods, right? But ActiveRecord is extremely smart and has custom created a bunch of class methods for me based on the attributes and columns that I've assigned to it in the schema. So again, we'll explore a little bit more of the power of the functions that ActiveRecord makes for us by spending some time swimming around in the documentation. And we'll talk more about how to correctly make changes to our schema in our database. But we only have a few seconds left. Are there any questions before I let you all go? No questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope that you got to see a little bit of the underlying power, what's happening behind the scenes in ActiveRecord. And I hope that some of these methods here that we have access to make you really excited about the power, the potential of the applications that you can build. And again, we'll dive a little bit more into this tomorrow. Thank you all for coming. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.